Hi there. Today we're having a look at conditions. Conditions are a way that programming languages use to enable you to make choices in your program, to decide what code should execute depending on a certain condition. In Delphi, these are done using if and then. So, to demonstrate this, I'll be doing this in the virtual programming laboratory, which forms part of your website, and then after that we'll have a look at this in Delphi. Have a look at the diagram. You can see that the flow of the program is going to work this way. We're going to start, give some or other instruction to the people using the program, get some input, and then depending on the input, we will execute a little if-then statement. If the condition that we represent with those three little dots is true, we'll do some or other task. Otherwise, the program will proceed without any change. This at the moment is the simplest form of if statement. So, for example, we give an instruction, type in a name, we read in the input. If the name is Jane, we write a little statement, hi Jane. And then our program proceeds back to the main line. If some other name was typed, the name is not Jane, then it goes through without having executed this whole little block off to the side. And these blocks can grow and be more complicated depending on what you need to do. In fact, entire separate sections of program can be written in this little section. Right, let's have a look at how this works in practice. We have the code in the virtual programming laboratory. I've started a dummy program, and now we're going to enter our input. Start with the instruction. And we follow this with our condition, which in Delphi will be if then. So if, and then our condition is s input. This is the example that we have in the diagram. When there's just one line of code that follows the if statement, you can leave out this extra begin and end. But if you have a multi-line statement following here, something that's going to have several instructions, you will need to wrap this inside a new begin and end statement. Notice that I have the begin of the program followed by the end with a full stop, and I have the begin for the if statement followed by an end for the if statement. And this begin and end, this small little block, you'll notice the end ends with a semicolon. The only end that ends with a full stop is the end at the very end of a program or unit. That marks the end of a full section of programming. Small little blocks like this inside your program, sub-blocks if you like, these ones are marked with begin and then end followed by a semicolon. As well as the ends, something else that you should pay attention to in this little exercise is the way I've used these single inverted commas. When you use single inverted commas, Delphi interprets these as the beginning and ends of strings. So if I have the string, I am here, I indicate that using single inverted commas. But if I want to write the string I'll be there, then I have a problem. That single inverted comma is going to confuse Delphi because that doesn't mark the beginning or the end of a string. So somehow I have to tell Delphi I want to print a single inverted comma on the screen. This I'm going to do by putting two next to each other. Two single inverted commas next to each other like that is what Delphi interprets as show a single inverted comma on the screen. And that's what we have in our program code. So let's have a look at how this runs. Okay, I'm using a variable isInput, but I've forgotten to create it. Let's do that quickly. There we go. Save. Execute. And there we have it. Type a name. We're going to start with Jane. And you'll notice that our output is, as we expect, Hi Jane. From this output, right line Hi Jane, proceeding to I'm pleased to meet you. What would happen if we typed something different? Let's run this again. This time we're going to be Joan. So when our input did not include the trigger, when our condition was not met, code that is inside right line Hi Jane did not get executed. The only code that executed was the code outside the condition. What about when we want to have two different responses depending on the condition? In this particular example, it will only include the bit inside the condition, right line Hi Jane, if our condition is met. Input equals Jane. There's a slightly more sophisticated version of this called if then else. It operates on very similar terms to the if statement we've just looked at. We're going to use an else statement in addition. This gives us two different routes of instruction. We follow the same pattern. We start, give our instructions, generate our input, and then have a look at our if statement. If this condition is true, we're going to do one task. And then we have the else portion. Else, we'll do a second task and potentially meet up and carry on with our program. With actual code, it would look something like this. We start, we ask a question, in this case 2 plus 3. Someone types an answer and we compare our condition. If the answer is 5, in other words, the condition is true, then we'll go this way and execute a response. We're going to tell them, yes, you are right. Then we continue with our program. If they type anything else, then we will execute the else portion. Condition is false, so we're going to give some other appropriate response and then continue our program. In some programs, you will then meet up and follow a single line of execution again. In other programs, you may end up with totally separate execution lines. So depending on the first response, your program will go one way, and depending on the second response, it will go some other totally different way. Think of a login screen where you type in your password. If the password succeeds, your program goes one way. If your password fails, you don't get to go that way, you go somewhere else. But more usually, you're going to find your program incorporates multiple sequences of if statements as well as other control structures to enable it to execute and perform its various operations. All right, let's try and have a look at this one now in actual code. I'm going to modify the little program we have on the screen. So we're going to say, let's enter a number, 2 plus 3 and we're still going to get our input. But this time I'm going to want our input to be a number. So we're going to add conversion of S input into a number. This is part of the sysutils unit. We give a nice little response, and now we're going to add our else. The full statement is if, then, else. If I type this, I'm going to be, in summary, saying something along these lines. If answer equals 5 or 6, then do something else. Do something else. The semicolon for this statement comes at the very end of the line. So my full line at the moment reads, if answer equals 5, then do something else. Do something else. And that's where my semicolon stops. If we have a look at the code in the little application we're writing, you'll see I have at the end of this line end. I'm going to have to take that semicolon out, else As we have a look at the code that we have in the virtual programming lab, you'll see that my full statement begins if S answer is equal to 5, and it ends at the bottom with an end with a semicolon. And in between, end, no semicolon, because this is continued as part of the else, onto the next line. And inside, I could have multiple lines. Save this and execute. Spelling is always important, and my variable is ions and not sons. Also, don't forget to terminate your strings. So there is the question. I type 5. What's going to happen is my input is going to be converted into an integer, and it's going to tell me I got that right. And then we continue with the rest of our program. Let's see what happens if I get it wrong. My maths was never very good, and I'm afraid that is wrong. So when I typed 5, the condition executed, and it checked, is I answer equal to 5? It was. Then it executed the little portion in the first section. This bit executes when it is true. When I answered 6, then it skips over the section that would be answered if it was true, and it only executes the section for when my answer is false. In your course webpage, you will find a few exercises to practice using this particular concept. to try these exercises in the virtual programming lab, and then have a look and see if you can do these in Delphi. In Delphi, you're going to have to create a new project, so go New, VCL Forms Application. Over here, we're going to have to add an edit for input and a button to trigger the event, and maybe a panel, or we use show message to display some output. So you will find the edit in the standard section. There's our edit box. I'm also going to add a button which will trigger the event, and a panel to display the output. Let's give the edit button and panel a slightly more appropriate set of names, starting with the edit. Button. Panel. We also need somewhere to actually ask our question. So I'm going to add a label form, and we can increase the size of the font slightly so that the poor people who are doing this problem can actually read it. And we'll need to give that label a name as well. So we go to name. A real problem. We're going to set the text for that label when the form shows for the first time. We can do this in the form create method, the form create event. Double click on the form and we can add it here. LBL problem.caption what is 2 plus 3? As I execute my program, that sets the initial question, what is 2 plus 3? I would also like to clear the edit box and set focus so that it is easy to type, give a more appropriate caption for the button, and make sure there's nothing sitting in the panels. There is one small little catch. I can't actually set the focus for the edit box until the form has already been created. So I'm not going to be able to do that inside the form create method. Let me add this then. Make sure I'm working with a form. Go to events, and just so we can see this better, I'm going to hide that section. I want to add this to the on show event of the form, and it is EDT and EDT answer dot clear, which will erase the contents of the edit box. EDT answer dot set focus. That will set the focus to be inside the edit box. As we run this, what is 2 plus 3? And you'll notice that now there is nothing in that edit, and the cursor was blinking there right from the start. So that is the control that has focus. While we're at it, let's set the button btn answer dot caption and we're going to clear the panel as well. PNL feedback. Notice I'm using the new names that I gave those things. I can't refer to them by the default names that Delphi used anymore. And this will be caption. In this instance, the two inverted commas next to each other mean an empty string, a string which has no content. So our program is now set. Unfortunately, it doesn't do anything. I can type whatever I want and it's not checking. This has to be tied to the on-click event of the button. Double click the button and it will create a space where you can add the code that will be triggered when the button is pressed. We're going to use our, just as in the previous example done in the virtual programming lab, we're going to have to create some variables to work with. I can create variables which apply specifically to this procedure that triggers when the button is pressed by adding the word var underneath the word procedure. So var is input is a string, I_ans going to be an integer. We could get by in this instance without s input because we're taking the value from the edit box, but I'm going to be keeping this as similar to the virtual programming lab version as possible. So s input is the answer, gets the value from edit answer. I_ans is going to be that input converted into integer. We now follow by our if statement, and you'll see that as soon as I add a space, Delphi is going to start to complete some code for me. The value true is where I'm going to be typing my condition. I_ans equals 5. Tab, and we're on to the next line. And now begin, and Delphi completes the code for me already by adding end. Begin, instead of write line, I'm now going to display this in the panel. Panel, remember we changed the name, feedback dot caption equals well done that and now I'm going to add the else. Notice I took out the inverted comma that Delphi had created for me. Begin, and Delphi creates the other end. This is where this if statement ends. That whole thing is one single if statement. PNL feedback dot caption colon equals and there's our program. If I run this, here's our application. What is that? It's obviously 6. I'm sorry, that is wrong. Notice again, double inverted commas in the program, displayed as a single inverted comma in the output string. If I change that to 5, check. Well done, that's right. Thanks for watching. I hope you find this useful. See you again next time.